Would we say, since the inauguration?
Well, today's 3 weeks, so we've really got the hang of it now. After 3 weeks, we should have it all worked out, all the kinks.
How are you feeling?
I feel great. You know, it's been a lot of work. There's a lot of things going on, and we kind of jump right into it. There's been very little downtime from leading up to the inauguration, and then the session had already started. We had to put a budget together 24 hours later after I was sworn in. So it's been hectic, but we're feeling great about how things are going.
You had some of the dynamics, I'm imagining, of that budget already constructed, so this wasn't clearly out of the blue.
Yeah, well, you know, we've been following the things from afar, but we didn't have the levers of power. We didn't have the staff. We didn't have the, so we actually had it during transition, basically with volunteers, and we pulled together some of the smartest Democrats and Republicans, former members of the legislature in both houses, to try to advise us on what to do. But we literally did not have any staff or cabinet or anybody working on it until I was sworn in.
From a numbers standpoint, and I know you've heard it, many of us have heard it, Maryland has been recognized in recent years, eclipsing some of the other states. I don't know where it is in 2015, as being one of the wealthiest states, if not the wealthiest in the country.
Right.
You consistently feel it's also one of the most overtaxed states.
Well, the two don't really have much to do with each other. We have some very wealthy people in Maryland, but we've also got some serious economic problems. And it's not just me that feels we're overtaxed. We're the fifth highest tax state in the nation. 76% of the people in Maryland feel that taxes are too high, and it's one of the reasons why I was elected governor. You know, we won a campaign, and we won 20 out of 23 counties by more than 35 percentage points. It was mostly about taxes and spending.
There's a dichotomy here. We've got Maryland traditionally, in terms of voting,
yeah,
overwhelmingly Democratic. You have an overwhelmingly Democratic legislature you're dealing
sure.
with. Yet when you look at issues, and we'll get into the meat of them in a moment, when you look at issues like rolling back the gas tax, which is something you're a fan of, dealing with the stormwater remediation fee
right.
in some kind of way, though the legislature is overwhelmingly Democratic, the people in the state aren't necessarily in agreement with these fees. How do you,
sure.
how do you jive the two? There seems to be a disconnect.
Well, I talked about that a lot during my campaign, and I just mentioned that last week when I was talking with the legislature. People everywhere, all across Maryland, do feel a huge disconnect between Annapolis and the rest of Maryland. And I ran a campaign that had nothing to do with Republicans versus Democrats. I built the largest nonpartisan organization in state history. We had 132,000 people involved in my group, Change Maryland. I had more Democratic votes than Republican votes, which is unusual. I'm only the second Republican governor in nearly 50 years to be elected, but I wasn't elected because I was a Republican. I was elected because we focused on the issues that people cared about, and people were really looking for a change of direction in our state, and that's what I'm hoping to bring. Was
your election a mandate, do you think, to your to the legislature you're going to work with, that they want change?
Well, there's no question about that. I mean, an overwhelming majority of Marylanders in 20 out of 23 counties desperately wanted to see change in Annapolis, and their number one issue was taxes.
Let's talk about that. What taxes specifically, in what manner are you talking about rolling back? State income tax?
Well, so the first thing we've got to do, Kai, is get spending under control. Over the past 8 years, Maryland raised 40 taxes in a row. That took an additional $10 billion out of the pockets of struggling Maryland families and small businesses. And I believe it had a lot to do with hurting our economy. We lost 8,000 businesses. Unemployment in Maryland doubled. We lost 200,000 jobs. That's what we're trying to turn around. I've said over and over again, once we get spending under control, which is the first step, because we have to balance the budget, then we want to roll back as many of the 40 tax increases as we possibly can to revive our economy. We started with a few, and the number one on our list was a press conference we had yesterday, which is the Repealing the Rain Tax, which is, you know, all 40 of the taxes had opposition across the state. But this was the one that really broke the camel's back. It was the straw that really set off a firestorm, people that just believed it was a ridiculous idea. And it has overwhelming, repealing the rain tax has overwhelming support among Democrats, Independents, and Republicans everywhere in the state.
Well, let's peel back some of the layers here. What part was ridiculous? The federal mandate that Maryland has to take its own responsibility to help clean up the Chesapeake Bay, or the manner in which the law was enacted?
Yeah, no, the federal mandate is all about trying to protect the Bay, which is our number one priority. Forcing counties to raise taxes on their citizens against their will for the rain that falls on the roof of their house, that was the stupid idea. We became the laughing stock of the nation. We're the only state in the entire country that tried to do this. It was a bad idea, and overwhelming, huge majorities of people all across the state are opposed to it. Many of the counties pushed back and said, first of all, I don't believe the state should be usurping the authority of the local jurisdictions and ordering them to raise taxes. But many states said, look, many counties said, we're handling this without a tax increase. Carroll County said to the state, we're not doing it. We've been doing it for years. We have the money in our existing budget to handle our stormwater management responsibilities. And the state then threatened them with $10,000 a day fines if they didn't raise taxes. So they refused to do it. Frederick County said, okay, we'll technically comply with the law by raising taxes by 1 penny. We're not doing any more because we already have the money to fix these problems. What this does is repeals the mandate that forced counties, took away their options, and forced them to raise taxes when they didn't want to. That's all it does. We're all going to comply with the federal mandate. We're going to focus very hard on stormwater management. Each county can make their own decisions about how to handle that best. Some places want to continue with the rain tax. Some of them definitely do not.
And how do you audit whether the county's doing what they need to do?
Well, the state is going to be auditing all of them, and we're going to be managing the process. Nothing changes about stormwater management. Nothing changes about the federal mandate. The only thing that changes is the forced tax increases.
Do you have the votes?
I think we do. We certainly have the votes of the people. Somewhere around 2/3 of the people in Maryland support the repeal of it. I was happy to hear that the President of the Senate said he agrees. He said he's going to easily pass it through the Senate. Had a great breakfast this morning with the Speaker of the House. We met for about an hour and a half. He's not quite convinced yet. I'm hoping we can get the people of Maryland to convince him.
You've been in office, as you mentioned, some 3 weeks now already. The honeymoon seems to be over. The President of the Senate that you just mentioned just last week, making statements such as you need to govern more from the middle. Still dealing with an overwhelmingly Democratic legislature. However, a legislature that's very different under your predecessor, so that perhaps is in your favor. What are your thoughts about Senator Mike Miller's statements, particularly last week? He seemed a little frustrated with some of your plans.
Well, he was a little frustrated. First of all, I agree with the fact that we're going to govern from the middle. That's what my entire campaign has been about. That's why more Democrats than Republicans voted for me. That's why I was elected. We're going to try to bring people together. Already in 3 weeks, we're the most bipartisan administration in Maryland history. First of all, as I said, I started the largest nonpartisan group. I ran a nonpartisan campaign. Everything about my inaugural speech and my State of the State speech, where I said 12 times about working together, reaching across the aisle, was about nonpartisanship and Democrats and Republicans coming together to solve these problems. But, you know, they're not always going to agree with everything. Let's face it, there are folks here that have been doing things a certain way for 8 years. They feel as if what they've been doing is right. They think the 40 tax increases were good. They think that they've done great things with our economy. An overwhelming majority of Marylanders disagree. That's why they sent me. So I'm an agent of change, and some of them are trying to defend the status quo. There's going to be naturally a little bit of friction, but we're doing everything we can to work. Since the little dust up last week, I spent a couple hours with the Senate President over the weekend. I spent an hour and a half with the Speaker today. I'm having individual meetings with senators and delegates on both sides of the aisle.
How did those meetings go?
They're going great. There's a lot of common ground. We're open to figuring out the best way to solve these problems. I'm not a my way or the highway kind of guy. I don't care whether it's a Democrat or Republican comes up with the best idea. We're going to let the best ideas rise to the top based on their merits and not based on politics.
Let's talk about the gas tax. That went into effect just a few years ago. What are your thoughts about that? Do you believe, first of all, what are your thoughts about the gas tax? This is a tax that you believe unnecessarily and unfairly burdens average Marylanders.
Well, so we had $1 billion in the Transportation Trust Fund, which was supposed to be spent on improving transportation in Maryland and building, fixing roads and bridges and providing for mass transit and whatnot. $1 billion was drained out of the trust fund, in my view, improperly, and now we've passed legislation prohibiting that from happening anymore. That's why the referendum was on. We were big opponents of the fact that they drained the trust fund. And then when it was drained, there was no money left. Governor O'Malley said, we have crumbling roads and bridges and the worst traffic in the nation. We have to raise the largest gas tax in history. Had we not taken $1 billion out, we would have no need whatsoever for that gas tax. But what I've proposed is, look, I realize what we can and can't get done. I realize we're in a terrible budget crunch. We do need to fix roads because they haven't been worked on for 8 years. So we're not going after, at this point, the repeal of the gas tax. The gas tax that passed had a provision that was kind of snuck into the legislation where it automatically will increase every single year without ever having another vote. That's the part that we're submitting legislation to repeal. Because I believe that every time another dollar is taken out of a taxpayer's pocket, that they ought to at least have the transparency of voting up or down on the issue.
And so what happens if this comes to the floor, or the House and Senate gets passed, and both houses decide we want to leave it like it is? Can you live with that?
Well, I mean, they can do whatever they want with respect to the legislation, but
Will you sign it?
will I sign what?
If they don't remove that part.
I don't have to sign it. See, the current law has already been enacted by the previous governor and the previous legislature, and we're trying to change it. If it doesn't change, it stays the way it is. It never comes to my desk.
Okay.
Yeah.
If that happens,
We'd be disappointed, and so would the people of Maryland.
I'm sure you're going to make a pitch that doesn't just stay like that.
Right.
One of the issues, and I talked with one of the people in the Senate just a few minutes ago, and the question was, what happens to big transportation projects, the red line, the purple line, some of these other things, if this provision in the gas tax is repealed?
Well, it doesn't really have a lot to do with that. I mean, it kind of nibbles around the edges at the future out-year increases. Really about these projects, it depends on how much money we can replenish into the Transportation Trust Fund from the $1 billion that was taken. We do have revenues now coming in because of the big tax increase last year. Those projects we're taking a very close look at. You know, there's some worthwhile merits on both of these issues. There are some real strong problems with both of them from a cost standpoint. So we're getting input from all the stakeholders opposed and in favor of both projects, the red line and the purple line. We have our brand new transportation secretary, who's also been on the job for 3 weeks, and his team and our budget team, both poring over lots of information. We're not going to rush the decision. We want to make sure we make the right informed decision. But it has to do with, you know, how to best utilize the tax dollars we have, the transportation monies we have, and where the biggest need is, and where we can get the biggest bang for our buck.
In the process of trying to rein in the budget of Maryland, one of the things that looks like it's on the table is a deduction from school systems, particularly Baltimore City, some roughly $35 million. I may have the figure off a little bit. What are your thoughts about that? You have a lot of people who would like to see that
Sure.
reinstated, and you have people in the legislature who would like to work with you
Absolutely.
on doing that.
Well, first of all, let me just clarify. We increased spending in education. We didn't cut a penny from education. In fact, no governor in Maryland history has spent as much on K through 12 education as we are in our budget. We're fully funding school construction. In fact, we added an additional $30 million to school construction from what O'Malley and Brown were proposing, which was $260 million. We're up to $290 million. We added funds.
Changes under your plan, Governor?
Under our plan, because we came in 3 weeks ago and inherited a problem budget that had promised increased spending, $700 million in spending that we did not have the money for, that we could not pay for. So we had to find ways to solve this shortfall. We have to have a balanced budget. What we dealt with is a really difficult problem because 81% of the budget is mandated. We can't change it. Only 19% can we do anything about. What we did was we're taking a 2% cut to all state agencies, except education, where we had pretty substantial increases. The increases didn't go as far as some people would like, and not as far as we would like.
So
we've got to find solutions.
They're calling them a shortfall.
It's a shortfall from what they had hoped they could get, but it's an increase over last year. And we're hoping that we can find some solutions to put even more money. Baltimore City is a different issue. Baltimore City wasn't shortchanged by our administration. There's funding formulas that was giving extra money to the jurisdictions that had the most poverty. Baltimore City's income and property tax values went way up. So the formulas changed automatically. It didn't have anything to do with our budget.
The devil's in the details.
Right.
Under your calculation, what's the state's budget right now, roughly?
Well, we for the first time are submitting a budget that actually expends exactly, we're spending what we're taking in, which is $16.4 billion.
$16.4 billion, okay. But again, the state's still dealing with what's known as a structural deficit? We
inherited altogether a $1.23 billion shortfall. Part of it was for this year we're currently in. We're still in the FY15 budget, but dealing with next year's $700 million for the FY16 budget, which we're submitting.
Okay, last question on it, because I know you have to get out of here. Where's your optimism right now? You've come in, your speech here on inaugural day was one very much that was one of bringing people together, one of both parties working together.
Yeah.
There seems to be a great deal of support for you outside of Annapolis in terms of the citizens of Maryland. Where's your sense of optimism in terms of what you want to do down the future? Because right now, the reason why I'm asking this,
Yeah.
people are hearing that you want to rein in the budget, and I think there's a great deal of support for that. Others are also saying, okay, what does Governor Hogan want to do to grow the state of Maryland?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, my entire focus of my effort has been to grow the state of Maryland. My campaign effort was about how do we create more opportunities and more jobs for our citizens? How do we grow our economy? How do we get Maryland businesses to grow? And how do we attract more businesses to come to our state so we can put more of our citizens to work? Because we lost 8,000 businesses and 200,000 jobs. That's our #1 problem. That's why we're having budget problems. We don't have as much revenue as we expected or hoped for. So we're going to try to fix economic development and turning our economy around as our primary focus. Getting the budget under control is a part of that, but we've got to stimulate the private sector and get our economy back on track. I'm really hopeful. I'm hopeful for our people. I'm hopeful for our state. I'm really, in spite of little bumps here and there, which are natural friction with a new person coming in with a new idea, I think we are going to get people to work together. And I believe that a majority of Marylanders, regardless of their party affiliation, are really looking for positive changes in Maryland, and they're going to give us a chance to do that. And so far, we've got a lot of support out there from Democrats, Republicans, and Independents to try to take Maryland in a new direction and put us on a new path.
We know Maryland is very much well known for biotech, great university system, great hospital system, but I've heard, and I'm not telling you anything you don't know, that this state is incredibly unfriendly to businesses.
Sure.
Do you agree with that, or is that not fair?
It was a big part of our campaign effort. Look, we have so many assets here in Maryland. We've got world-class universities. We've got some of the best schools in the country. We've got biotech. We got one of the most highly educated, hardest working populations in the country. We have the Port of Baltimore and BWI and transportation network and infrastructure. We're in the heart of the Mid-Atlantic region. We're next to the Washington, D.C. We have all these assets, and in spite of that, our state economy ranks 49th out of 50 states. It's just simply unacceptable. We have to turn things around. We have all these assets, but there are 3 problems. We have a regulatory environment that's really difficult. We have an anti-business attitude, and we've got a tax policy that doesn't allow us to compete with the other states in our region. We're going to try to fix all 3. On day 1, Maryland became open for business. We got a governor focused on how do we help businesses and do more business in Maryland.
And I heard you say that in your inauguration speech, and you would have critics, Governor, who would say, that sounds great. How are you going to pay for it? Because the state needs to generate revenue to pay for roads, bridges,
right,
businesses that exist, homeowners
exactly
have to toe their fair share of the line in terms of taxes. How do you pay for it?
Actually, so that's why we have to turn the private sector economy around. That's how you pay for it. If we don't turn this economy around, if we don't bring it, our businesses don't grow, if our economy doesn't grow from 49th, if we don't attract new business to the state, we'll continue to have declining revenues. So the way we pay for all the important services that everybody wants and needs that we all agree on is to get this economy on track. And then we have more revenues, more people working, more businesses doing well, they're paying more taxes, the state's getting more revenue, and we're able to solve a lot more problems. We can't just keep cutting the budgets and writing things down every quarter because our economy's tanking.
That's good. Yeah.
Do we have time for one more question about heroin?
Heroin?
Sure.
Yeah, you've made a big push, and you have kind of sounded the alarm that heroin is a major problem in the state of Maryland. I've heard a few people who said it's been a problem, particularly in the urban areas of the state of Maryland. Why the alarm now?
Well, as I was running for governor, I spent more than a year going from one end of the state to the other. I went to Baltimore City in every single county, probably 10 or 12 times. I talked to average people everywhere. And I was shocked to find the extent of this problem. It's not just an urban problem. It's not a Baltimore City problem. It's in our suburban communities. It's in our rural communities. I went to small towns and small counties, and I said, what's the #1 issue or problem facing your community? Caroline County, for example, on the Eastern Shore. They said heroin. I was in St. Mary's County in Southern Maryland. I was in Washington County in Western Maryland. Their #1 issue is heroin. It's tearing our communities apart. Our kids are dying. It's an unbelievable problem. We've got one of the worst problems in the country.
And why? And I know our partners, New Jersey, Vermont,
Yeah.
has a huge problem with it. Your colleagues up there, the governors, are taking
Yeah.
drastic action with Narcan, I believe, to try and allow.
That's
first
one of the
responders to
ideas.
administer it. Why is it such a problem? Are people trying to escape from reality? What are the issues? Do you
You know, I think there's a lot of reasons for it, but I understand two of the biggest reasons are, we crack down pretty effectively on cocaine at the border. And so crack cocaine is no longer as readily available as it used to be. And then prescription drugs, we've done a good job of cracking down on. People are OxyContin. So now the readily available and inexpensive drug of choice that's everywhere is heroin. And unfortunately, it's even much more dangerous than any of the ones it's replacing.
My understanding is it's a cheap high and it lasts for a long time.
I mean, you can, for less than a pack of cigarettes, you can go get heroin, and you never know what it's being cut with. People are dying every day in our state, and we've got to do something about it.
How do you attack it?
We're going to call it, first of all, we're going to make sure that we shed light on the problem, as we already have. Lieutenant Governor Boyd Rutherford is going to head up a task force. We're going to call a group of summits together around the state. It's really a complex problem that involves drug treatment and recidivism and emergency responders and hospitals and law enforcement and corrections. We got to bring all these different stakeholders to the table and figure out the best solutions from around the country. We want to attack this. It's not an easy problem. A lot of people don't want to talk about the problem, but we want to bring it to the forefront and see what we can do to get it fixed.